Hey guys, my name is Ruseva. I'm a student in Intro to Cyber Physical System Security here at Georgia Tech, and I'm going to be presenting Fear the Reaper, a paper on characterizing and detecting credit card skimmers. This paper was written by Nolan Scaife, Christian Peters, and Patrick Traynor from the University of Florida. It was first presented at the 27th USENIC Security Symposium in Baltimore, Maryland in August of 2018. The authors of the paper are trying to address the problem with skimmers. Nowadays, credit and debit cards completely dominate the payment landscape, and it's very easy to commit fraud against them. One way for attackers to acquire data is to use these skimmers, which are devices that attach to legitimate payment terminals that are designed to illicitly capture account information. Once installed, these skimmers are nearly invisible to the untrained eye and allow attackers to steal data, and then they can sell it or create counterfeit cards. Here are a couple of pictures of skimmers attached to payment terminals. You can see they're very hard to spot if you don't know what you're looking for. So the authors got tired of getting ripped off and decided to do something about it. In this paper, they described the design and deployment of the Skim Reaper, which is a device for detecting skimmers. They started by conducting the largest ever academic analysis of skimmers and then used the results to develop the Skim Detector, which is a portable payment card-shaped device that relies on the intrinsic properties of magnetic stripe reading to detect the presence of additional read heads in a payment terminal. They tested with 10 different real-life skimmers supplied by the New York Police Department and found it to be 100% successful. And this is what the Skim Reaper looks like, the finished product, and we'll go in more details on the design later. So in this presentation, we will follow the structure of the paper and we'll cover the fundamentals of card reading and fraud, magnetic stripe encoding, fraud, and common advice given to consumers. We will characterize the real-world skimmers found in New York City over a 16-month period. There are internal access and several different external access types. We will cover the design and implementation of the skimmer detector, which is based on the fundamental properties of the analyzed skimmers, and we will cover the testing of the device on a set of physical skimmers, again provided by NYPD. We'll start with some basic card reading and fraud info. So the magnetic stripes on the card store small amounts of data using F2F or frequency double frequency encoding. F2F stores both the clock and the data, allowing a reader to quickly synchronize the read of the data when the card moves at an inconsistent speed, such as when swiped. This figure here shows how decoding is performed. When the magnetic polarity change occurs within a clock cycle, the bit is 1, otherwise it's 0. The bit stream is then decoded into plain text characters, and it contains the card data, the name, account number, and expiration date. Data is stored on up to 3 adjacent tracks on a single stripe, with each having its own standard for character encoding and density. Magnetic stripe cards offer no protection from duplication. All data contained on the card's tracks is written as plain text, and someone with access to the magnetic stripe can easily create a legitimate clone of a card. These clone cards are magnetically distinguishable from the originals but contain the same data as the originals and can be used. To help with the use of counterfeit cards, banks and payment networks added the card verification value codes, or CVVs. There are two types, 1 and 2. CVV1 is the code that's part of the magnetic stripe data. It prevents the card from being cloned knowing only the data printed on the card, like the account number. But if bad guys have access to the magnetic data, which they can obtain with skimmers, CVV-1s are easily cloned with it. CVV-2s are the ones printed on the back of the card and are often requested at card not present transactions, like when making a phone purchase or online purchases. They're intended to prove possession of the original card. Bad guys can acquire those by either recording the PIN entry with a camera or through other ways like sites that sell card data with codes or with compromised web browsers, etc. Attackers are after the card data, which is mostly what's on the front of the card, but also on the stripe and the chip. When the authors of the paper looked at this problem, they found that criminals are getting this data using devices called skimmers, which is the problem the paper tackles. The goal of these skimmers is to copy enough data off of your card to be able to make a fraudulent transaction. And now this is even possible with the EMV or the chip cards. Once the attackers have the data, they can make reasonable looking clones and they can use them at a store or to drain an ATM account. Card skimming is a well-known crime and there is a widespread advice aimed at protecting consumers. The most common suggestions given are look for signs of a skimmer, pull on the card reader, use a smartphone app to scan for skimmers with Bluetooth radios, use an EMV or chip card, or use cash. These suggestions usually don't work. For tips 1 and 2, most people don't really know what a skimmer should look like or what should happen when you pull it off. For the Bluetooth suggestion, it works reasonably well, but a very small percentage of the skimmers analyzed actually had wireless capability. The EMV chip card is a little safer, but it can also be compromised. And the last one, use cash. You need a card to go to the ATM to get cash. And it also sidesteps the problem without really solving it. Previous studies have shown that any kind of security solution that requires a change in user behavior, like using cash instead of cards to protect against fraud, it's unlikely to be successful. To measure the problem, the authors partnered with the New York Police Department Financial Crimes Task Force, who gave them their BOLO set. BOLO is a memo to other officers or departments to let them know what's been found in the field so that they can recognize it if they see it. What these BOLOs represent are 35 unique skimmers that were found in New York City over a 16-month period. And this include location, type, and data retrieval method for the devices. The table here on the right shows the breakdown of each of the recovered skimmers. There were a total of 35, which sounds kind of low, but remember these are unique, so multiple devices of the same campaign don't result in additional bolos. This provides a clear insight into the variety of skimming technology confiscated by the police in the New York City market. Based on this data, the authors created a taxonomy of these devices and they put them into several categories based on where they're installed and what kind of access is needed to put them in. And in the next few slides, we will go over the different categories. Overlays were the most common device discovered in the dataset, comprising nearly half of the total skimmers found. These are placed onto the card slot, and they're usually custom manufactured to look like the real thing. They have an additional read head and decoding hardware inside the thing. Most of them require the attacker to come and physically remove them. Common advice is to pull on them, but criminals use really strong adhesive and you have to use some kind of prying to remove them. For criminals to successfully skim an ATM card, they have to also capture the PIN. It's the same kind of attack. They'll put on an overlay PIN pad to capture it. In the middle here is a real picture of one of the ones recovered by NYPD. It was made to look weathered so that it looked like it belonged. Or they will also put a camera, um, and they're very creative with where they put these cameras. On the bottom here is a picture of a light assembly from an ATM. Criminals who steal this and then drill a hole, put the camera, and install it back in. The hole here for the camera is around 3 millimeters. They're very hard to see. Cameras are one of the first things policemen look at because even though they're hard to see, it's still easier than trying to find the skimmer. Deep inserts. These are custom machine parts. Every one of them looks different. Criminals press them into the card reader using a special tool. In fact, they're so hard to remove that the police will usually remove the entire card reader. Similar to overlays, they also have an additional read head and decoding hardware and do an independent read to collect the card data. These are nearly impossible to see when they're installed. EMV shimmers. These are paper-thin, flexible boards that they put in the card slot. This device acts as a man in the middle between the EMV chip and the payment terminal. The EMV chip contains a nearly complete replica of the magnetic stripe. It doesn't contain the CVV1 code present on the stripe, and instead it provides a code known as iCVV. This prevents the bad guys from making a perfect counterfeit, but the counterfeit cards can still be used where CVV verification is not required. Internal skimmers are devices that sit in line between the card reader and whatever the next device is, like a motherboard. They capture both the magnetic data and the pin. In the NYPD Bolo set, these were found only in gas stations because since it requires opening the device to install them, it's a lot easier to do that on a gas pump than an ATM. These devices tap power from the host device, and as a result, most of them have wireless data retrieval capabilities. And since there's no outward appearance, these often capture data for months before they're detected. So it turns out that the most common way to pull this attack off is to add an additional read-in. And that's exactly what the overlay and the deep insert skimmers do, such that when you put your card into the slot and the skimmer reads the card and the legitimate reader reads the card. So the authors hypothesized that they can detect the presence of skimmers if they count the number of reads. When they analyzed the Bolo set, they noticed three common properties for the skimmers in the set. Touch. In order for the data to be accurately read from a magnetic stripe card, the magnetic read head must make physical contact with the card. Every device from the NYPD Bolos had a mechanism for pushing the card into the head. Magnetic read heads are inductors. A voltage is produced in the presence of a changing magnetic field, which produces a current through the read head, or eddy current. Magnetic field strength drops off exponentially with distance. Most manufacturers of payment terminals have data sheets that say you will have a bad time if you don't touch the card when it's reading it. Surface material. All of the observed skimmers had a metallic conductive head. For the read head to function at the most fundamental level, the head must be a conductor. This creates substantial enough voltage to read the card and requires low resistance. Makes sense that these are metal. And size. To keep the skimmer small, an attacker would need the smallest possible magnetic head. Every head in the Bolo set had 1.5 millimeters of contact on the card. In the end, these are small, they're metal, and they touch the card. The authors started making their first prototype in December of 2016, and after several iterations, they came to their final design. And that's the one where the traces are positioned in multiple directions over where the ISO standard tracks are. In other words, this is where the data is going to be, so this is where the skimmers are going to try to read and are going to pass over the traces. As the read head passes over, it creates a circuit, so this way the number of voltage spikes can be counted, and the voltage spikes occur every time a read head passes over the card. On the left of the two diagrams here is for a deep insert. You put your card in, you take it out, so you see the spike twice for a legitimate reader and 4 times if there is a skimmer present, and 1 and 2 spikes on the right here respectively for an overlay model. The Skim Reaper device consists of a payment card-sized board and an Adafruit Arduino-based microcontroller. The microcontroller applies 3.3 volts of voltage to one half of the traces and monitors for circuit completion on the opposite half. The card is intended to be inserted into the card acceptor on a payment device and relies on the properties of the magnetic read heads that we discussed earlier. The skimmers identified in the NYPD dataset are designed to press a metallic read head against the card during capture. The Reaper system here relies on these two properties and expects the read heads in the card acceptor to contact the card and bridge a pair of electrical traces, which then complete the circuit back to the microcontroller. The microcontroller can then measure the number of reads and can alert the user if a skimmer is detected. When they developed the device, the authors didn't have access to the payment devices that these skimmers were designed to attack. So once they developed the Reaper to test the device, they partnered once again with NYPD to obtain skimmers from their evidence storage. They got access to 10 external skimmers, 8 overlays, and 2 deep inserts. And this figure here shows the 10 skimmers they tested with, and many of these were confiscated in campaigns identified by the bolos discussed earlier. The authors were able to test the Reaper 5 times on each of these skimmers with a 100% success rate. So in summary, skimmers remain a major threat, and what the authors were able to do is collect data from NYPD on 35 unique skimmers, analyze them, and discover what the 3 common characteristics of these skimmers are. They built the Skim Reaper device based on these properties and went back to New York City and tested it on real skimmers, and it worked with a 100% success rate. Thank you for watching, and watch out for skimmers.